Golden Sound Story, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, there lived a lovely princess named Snow White. Her vain and wicked stepmother, the queen, feared that someday Snow White's beauty would surpass her own. So she dressed the princess in rags and forced her to work as a maid. Each day the queen asked her magic mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And as long as the mirror answered, "You are the fairest one of all," Snow White was safe from the queen's cruel jealousy. One day the mirror answered differently. To find out what happened, press a sound picture every time you come to a picture. It was morning, and Snow White was drawing water from the castle well. She sang a song with her friends, the birds. And she laughed.
That was fun!
As she turned to leave, a handsome prince appeared. They spoke for a few moments. Then, his eyes shining with love, the prince pledged his devotion and rode off into the woods. The jealous queen, who had been watching from a window, went to her mirror and summoned its magic spell. "Magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" "Alas," said the mirror, "there is one more beautiful than you. It is Snow White." Enraged, the queen ordered the royal huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. The huntsman took Snow White deep into the forest. Not knowing what he was planning to do, Snow White played the birds. Then sang a song with them and laughed.
That was fun!
Suddenly, without warning, the huntsman drew his knife and raised it above the princess. His hand shook, then suddenly he fell to his knees. "Forgive me, your highness," he said. He told her what the queen had ordered and begged Snow White to run and hide. Then he returned to the queen, reported that the terrible deed was done. The queen cackled. Back in the forest, Snow White was left alone. The sky grew dark and the trees seemed too close in around Snow White. She was about to flee in fear, but then she heard the song of the birds. And she began to feel better. The birds led her to a cottage. She knocked on the door, and when no one answered, she went inside. The place was messy, and she thought, maybe if I clean up, the people who live here will let me stay. So, singing along with the birds, she swept out the dirt and the cobwebs. Upstairs, she laughed
That was fun!
with a delight when she found 7 little beds with the names carved on them: Doc, Happy, Sneezy, Dopey, Grumpy, Bashful, and Sleepy. Thinking the beds must be for children, she lay down and fell asleep. At the diamond mine not far away, 7 dwarfs were busy digging with shovels and picks. The one named Doc called,
"Come on, men."
and the little men marched. Toward home. When they got there, they stared at their cottage in surprise.
"Jiminy crickets!"
It was clean. Mark my words, said Grumpy. There's trouble a-brewing. Maybe it's a ghost or a goblin, said the others. Worried, they marched up the stairs, where a mysterious shape lay under the covers. When it moved, they were surprised
Jiminy Cricket!
to see it was a young woman. Snow White woke up. Why, you're not children, she said. You're little men. Bashful smiled.
Oh, gosh!
Let's see, Snow White said to him. You must be the one called Bashful. His face turned red, and once again he smiled.
Oh, gosh!
Snow White guessed the others' names. Then she told them who she was and what the Queen had tried to do. Surprised
Jiminy Cricket!
by the Queen's evil plan, the dwarfs invited Snow White to stay. Snow White cooked a big pot of soup. Dot called,
Come on, men!
and the others marched to the table, but Snow White stopped him. First you have to wash, she said. Wash, said Grumpy. I knew there was a catch to it. The dwarfs cleaned up and ate dinner. Then they spent the evening singing and dancing with their new friend Snow White. At the castle, the Queen stood before the mirror and summoned its magic spell. The magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all? The mirror answered, in the cottage of the 7 dwarfs, Snow White, fairest one of all. Realizing the huntsman had tricked her, the angry Queen decided to visit Snow White herself, chanting a magic spell. The Queen was instantly changed into an old woman. She mixed a magic potion and dipped an apple into it. The old woman's face twisted into an evil grin, and she cackled. One taste of this poison apple, and her eyes will close forever in the sleeping death. The only thing that can wake her is the love's first kiss. At the cottage that evening, the dwarfs begged Snow White for a bedtime story. She told them about the charming prince, describing how she had laughed
That was fun.
and spoken with him. Then she told them how he had pledged his eternal love. A few of the dwarfs were surprised.
Jiminy Cricket!
Bashful just smiled.
Oh,
The next morning, Dot called,
come on, men!
and the dwarfs lined up to go to work. They warned Snow White to be aware of strangers. Then she kissed each of them on the top of the head, causing Bashful to smile.
Oh, gosh!
Whistling a merry tune, the dwarfs shouldered their picks, and off they marched. Left alone with the birds, Snow White baked a pie. As she finished, she saw an old woman watching her through the window and cackling. This is a magic wishing apple, said the woman. One bite and it will cast a spell, making your wish come true. Then she offered the poison apple to Snow White. Snow White took the poison apple and thought of a wish. I wish the prince would take me to his castle and we would live happily ever after. Then she bit into the apple and was overcome by its evil spell. She grew pale and slumped to the floor. The queen cackled. Now I'll be the fairest in the land. The birds flew into the woods looking for help. They found the 7 dwarfs at work with shovels and picks. Chirping noisily, the birds caught the dwarfs by surprise.
Jiminy Cricket.
Finally, Doc realized something must be wrong. He rallied the dwarfs with a call,
Come on, men.
and off they marched. Up ahead, lightning flashed as the old woman left the cottage and it began to rain. She saw the dwarfs marching. Toward her. Trying to escape, she climbed a rocky ledge as the old woman looked down on the dwarfs cackling. And a bolt of lightning struck the ledge and she tumbled to her doom. Gesturing to his friends, Doc called,
Come on, men.
and the dwarfs marched to their cottage to see if Snow White was all right. They were surprised
Jiminy Cricket.
and heartbroken to find her lying on the floor lifeless. But Snow White was so beautiful even in death that the dwarfs couldn't bring themselves to bury her. So they built a glass coffin and kept an eternal watch at her side with the animals and birds of the forest. Then one day, hearing of the maiden who slept in a glass coffin, the prince rode into the forest. He approached the coffin led by the birds. When he saw Snow White, he knew she was the one he had met at the well. Grieving at his loss, the prince knelt and kissed her. It was love's first kiss, and just as the queen had said, it broke the evil spell. Snow White sat up, and the prince lifted her onto his horse. The dwarf stared in surprise,
Jiminy Cricket.
then cheered and jumped for joy. Soon as they were joined in celebration by the animals and the birds. Snow White kissed the dwarfs goodbye, making bashful smile.
Oh, gosh.
Then, waving to her friend, she rode off with the prince to his castle, where they lived happily ever after.